The Middle East, a region long marked by tension, shifting alliances and unresolved disputes, now stands at the edge of a new and perilous chapter. Tonight, the world watches as the region teeters on the brink of all-out war, with military forces mobilizing and borders bristling with tension. On February 28, 2026, the simmering conflict between Iran and Israel has exploded into open warfare, shattering a fragile and uneasy peace that had persisted for months. In a dramatic escalation, Iran has unleashed a major missile counterattack against Israel, retaliating after a daring joint US-Israeli operation deep inside Iranian territory. In response, both nations have declared sweeping states of emergency, grounding flights, closing airspace, and placing their militaries on the highest alert. Across cities and towns, explosions echo in the night. Air raid sirens wail, sending civilians scrambling for shelter, while emergency responders race to save lives amid chaos and destruction. The world holds its breath. In airports, on city streets, and in newsrooms across the globe, anxious eyes are glued to unfolding events, fearing what might come next. The United States is now directly involved, with American interests, military personnel, and diplomatic missions suddenly thrust into the heart of the conflict, facing unprecedented risks. U.S. carrier strike groups have taken up strategic positions in nearby waters, their presence a clear signal of readiness to intervene further if the situation spirals out of control. Other world powers, including China, are urgently advising their citizens to evacuate or take extreme precautions, as the threat of regional escalation grows by the hour. The specter of a wider war now looms large, threatening not only regional stability but also global energy supplies. Oil markets are rattled, and humanitarian organizations brace for a crisis that could displace millions. With both sides on maximum alert, military command centers are on edge. The risk of a single miscalculation or misunderstanding triggering an even larger catastrophe is dangerously high. As leaders scramble for solutions and the world watches in apprehension, the stakes have never been higher. The Middle East now faces a defining moment, one that could shape the course of history for generations to come. The roots of this conflict stretch back decades, woven into the very fabric of the modern Middle East. The animosity between Iran and Israel is not just a recent phenomenon, but a story shaped by shifting alliances, revolutions, and the relentless pursuit of power and security. Iran and Israel's rivalry has long shaped Middle Eastern politics, fought not only on traditional battlefields, but also in the shadows, through cyber attacks, targeted assassinations, and the use of proxy forces. Each side has sought to undermine the other's influence, often using unconventional means that blur the lines between war and peace. Iran's alliances with groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and various militias in Syria and Iraq have fueled tensions, providing Tehran with strategic depth and leverage across the region. These groups have become powerful actors in their own right, often acting as extensions of Iranian policy and further complicating the regional landscape. In response, Israel has launched a campaign of covert operations and precision airstrikes aiming to curb Iran's growing influence and halt its nuclear ambitions. These actions are often shrouded in secrecy, but their impact reverberates across borders, sending clear messages of deterrence and resolve. Diplomatic efforts, meanwhile, have repeatedly failed to bridge the divide. Both sides remain unwilling to compromise on core issues: security, sovereignty, and the future of the region, leaving negotiations stalled and hopes for peace distant. In recent years, the conflict has escalated beyond rhetoric. Attacks on shipping lanes, drone strikes deep inside enemy territory, and high-profile assassinations have shattered the unspoken rules that once governed their shadow war, pushing both nations closer to open confrontation. Each aggressive move has triggered swift retaliation, creating a dangerous tit-for-tat dynamic that threatens to spiral out of control. The cycle of action and reaction has become a defining feature of their relationship. Deep-seated mistrust, and the belief that the other seeks regional dominance, have made compromise nearly impossible. Nationalist rhetoric and public displays of defiance only harden positions on both sides. The shift from covert conflict to open warfare marks not just the failure of diplomacy, but also the collapse of long-standing deterrence. The region now teeters on the edge, with the risk of escalation higher than ever. The buffers and backchannels that once prevented direct confrontation have eroded, leaving both sides exposed and the region more volatile than at any point in recent memory. As the consequences of this bitter history unfold, it is the civilians, caught between powerful adversaries, who bear the heaviest burden, facing uncertainty and hardship in a region scarred by decades of enmity. The immediate trigger for Iran's missile barrage was a massive, coordinated U.S.-Israeli military operation, the likes of which had not been seen in the region for years. This joint offensive was meticulously planned, involving months of intelligence gathering, logistical preparation, and diplomatic maneuvering behind the scenes. The world watched as two of the most powerful militaries in the world launched a synchronized assault, sending shockwaves through the international community. This was no minor strike. Multiple waves of precision-guided munitions targeted Iran's most sensitive nuclear and military infrastructure. Key facilities, believed to be at the heart of Iran's nuclear ambitions, were hit in rapid succession. The strikes were designed to cripple Iran's ability to enrich uranium and to degrade its command and control networks, sending a clear message about the seriousness of the threat perceived by Washington and Tel Aviv. The operation marks a deliberate and dramatic escalation, moving beyond years of covert sabotage and cyber attacks to open, kinetic warfare. This was not just about containment anymore. It was about actively dismantling what both nations saw as an existential threat. The decision to strike was not taken lightly, and it reflected a fundamental shift in strategy. U.S. involvement transforms the conflict into a direct confrontation with Tehran, raising the stakes for the entire region. The Pentagon's public statements left little doubt. America was now fully committed, standing shoulder to shoulder with its closest Middle Eastern ally. American bases and personnel across the Middle East are now at risk of retaliation, with security levels raised to their highest in years. Soldiers and diplomats alike braced for the possibility of Iranian counterstrikes, not just in the immediate aftermath, but for weeks and months to come. For Israel, the goal was clear: to set back Iran's nuclear program by years, if not decades, and to disrupt the network of proxy militias that threaten its borders. Israeli leaders saw this as a necessary, if risky, step to ensure their nation's survival in an increasingly volatile region. For the U.S., it was about demonstrating resolve, re-establishing deterrence, and reassuring allies that American power and commitment remain unshaken. The administration hoped that a decisive show of force would prevent further escalation, even as it risked igniting a wider conflict. The presence of U.S. carrier groups in the Persian Gulf underscored the seriousness of the moment. These floating fortresses served as both a deterrent and a launchpad for further operations, signaling to Iran and the world that the U.S. was prepared for any contingency. Decision-makers in Washington and Tel Aviv weighed the risks carefully, ultimately judging that the dangers of inaction, allowing Iran's nuclear program to advance unchecked, were greater than those of a direct strike. The gravity of their choice was evident in the tense faces and urgent discussions behind closed doors. Iran's fierce and immediate response shows the attack crossed a red line, triggering a wave of missile launches and mobilizing its regional allies. Tehran's leaders vowed swift and severe retaliation, framing the joint offensive as an act of war. What was meant to project strength and restore deterrence has instead ignited a regional firestorm. Oil facilities burn, emergency teams scramble, and civilians flee as the specter of all-out war looms over the Middle East. The Middle East is now closer than ever to a catastrophic war, with the world anxiously watching to see what comes next. Iran's response was swift, a massive missile barrage targeting Israel. This direct military action marks a dramatic shift from Iran's usual reliance on proxies. Iran's missile arsenal is among the largest in the region, and this attack was meant to send a clear message: Iran will retaliate forcefully. Explosions were reported in Tehran and near a U.S. base in Bahrain, raising fears of rapid escalation. Supreme Leader Khamenei has been moved to a secure location, while President Pezeshkian manages the crisis. Iran is bracing for further attacks and preparing for sustained conflict. By targeting Israel directly, Iran aims to restore deterrence and rally domestic support. The use of advanced missiles is a show of strength to both domestic and international audiences. The stakes have risen sharply, with the region now trapped in a cycle of escalating violence. Both Iran and Israel are now on a war footing, fundamentally altering daily life for millions. Airspace closures and national emergencies have grounded flights and shuttered businesses. In Israel, schools are closed and families shelter from air raid sirens. In Iran, strict information control masks, widespread fear and disruption. Both governments are mobilizing defense systems and preparing for further attacks. Neighboring countries brace for spillover, while foreign governments urge their citizens to take shelter or leave. The Chinese embassy and the US have issued stark warnings to their nationals. The international consensus is clear. The situation is volatile and could deteriorate rapidly. Civilians across the region face grave and immediate risks. The conflict has sent shockwaves worldwide, prompting urgent calls for de-escalation. Diplomats scramble for solutions, but US involvement complicates mediation. Allies of the US and Israel express solidarity, but fear a wider war. European leaders warn of refugee crises and energy disruptions. Nations like Russia and China condemn the strikes and call for restraint. The risk of empowering extremist groups and destabilizing the region is high. The Middle East's complex web of alliances could turn this into a multi-front war. The world faces the prospect of a conflict that could spiral far beyond the region. The greatest tragedy is the danger faced by civilians. In both Iran and Israel, millions live in fear, their lives upended by war. Families shelter from missile attacks, uncertain if safety is possible. The US has advised its citizens to leave Israel, fearing attacks on soft targets. A large-scale conflict could destroy infrastructure and trigger a humanitarian crisis. Refugee flows would strain neighboring countries and aid organizations. Modern warfare's reliance on missiles and drones means civilian casualties are almost inevitable. For those on the ground, survival depends on technology and luck. Analysts warn that attacking Iran risks a prolonged, costly conflict. Iran's military is battle-hardened and committed, with powerful proxies across the region. US and Israeli resources, especially missile defenses, could be quickly depleted. Iranian proxies may open new fronts, targeting US and allied interests. The Strait of Hormuz is at risk, threatening global oil supplies. Scenarios range from escalating tit-for-tat strikes to a wider regional war. Diplomatic intervention is possible, but increasingly unlikely. The next days will determine if this crisis can be contained, or if it will spiral out of control. The world watches as the Middle East teeters on the edge of catastrophe. Direct confrontation between Iran and Israel has shattered the fragile status quo. Airspace closures and states of emergency reflect the gravity of the moment. The cycle of attack and retaliation threatens to draw in more nations. Diplomatic efforts are hampered by US involvement as a participant, not a mediator. Calls for restraint are universal, but concrete solutions are elusive. The fate of the region, and perhaps the world, hangs in the balance. For now, uncertainty reigns as leaders face choices that could shape history.